Thank you for listening to ClassicalU's podcast, for following us with our courses, training teachers, parents, school leaders on ClassicalU.com. On the podcast, we interview guests that are recording with us, leaders and authors that we're in conversation with related to how to run a great classroom, how to deliver the liberal arts, great books, classical languages to your students. We also have a webinar series, live learning events that is in collaboration with Scole Academy and Scole Communities. Encourage you to watch for those as well. Those are monthly, and we're delighted to have you. Thank you. Christopher, Perrin, Carrie Eben, it's wonderful to have you on the ClassicalU podcast. We've just recently recorded a brand new ClassicalU course together that is picking up on a book that the two of you have co-authored, and also picking up on a course on ClassicalU that's been with us since ClassicalU launched 7 or 8 years ago. And this book on pedagogy and the classical tradition, and you have titled it The Good Teacher. And you've gone from 8 principles in the original ClassicalU course that you recorded, Dr. Perrin, and you have expanded it together to 10 principles. I have been enjoying the content as we've been turning that new course into something ready to share with our audience very soon, and have a lot of questions. But starting out, I wanted to ask the two of you, when did you cook up the idea of co-authoring this, and where did that come about?
As you mentioned, Jesse, there was a course that we created, I think over 10 years ago, called the 8 Essential Principles of Classical Pedagogy. And so I've been thinking about this for a long time, and then thinking eventually about, writing something about it. Several people asked me to do that. And at one point, a colleague said, I think it would be great if you had a co-author to help you with this. And I said, I would love that. And Carrie's name came up. Someone said, have you heard of Carrie Eben? And then I had the fortune of sitting next to her at a dinner about 5 years ago at one of these conferences, and we started to talk, and one thing led to another. And my background as an educator has been primarily in upper school, and I don't have deep experience teaching younger children. Carrie does, and so when I realized that, I thought, we could be a great complements to one another. She's taught older students and I've taught younger students, but we mainly have expertise and experience in different aspects of the school. So we had a conversation. I really enjoyed it. I think she could be the one, and we started talking, and one thing led to another. And then we decided, let's do this. We collaborated on the book.
Thank you. So what's your version of the story, Carrie?
Well, I was the one. That sounds great. But I was a fan of the principles before I think I was watching a YouTube video of Chris in his basement. Wasn't there a YouTube video out there when it was 8 principles?
That's true.
Yeah,
before the course, yes.
All in one lecture at that.
Yes,
first.
It was all in one, and so that was probably 7 years ago, I think, or 6 or 7 years ago, where we found that it was free. It wasn't on class. I don't even know if ClassicalU was.
That's probably pre-ClassicalU. Yeah, probably yes. Like on the Classical Academic Press, YouTube channel or something.
Yeah, so you can't find this video anymore, sad to say. But we actually used that video of Chris in his basement talking about the 8 principles for new teacher training for the brand new school that Jessica Hooten Wilson and I co-founded together along with another couple. And we use that training for our teachers. And so our teachers are fans of the 8 principles. And I had been looking to kind of share some ideas that I had with pedagogy, and somebody said I should talk to Chris. So I talked to Chris, and it's like he said, he asked me to collaborate, and I was very, very grateful just to be invited to do that. And I've had a wonderful journey along the way. It's been great.
Very good. Well, it was very fun to have you out here in person recording the course together not too long ago. And that was your second time recording that for as when I've been around, you recorded a lecture as well in the Women in the Tradition, the
Yes.
Women in the Liberal Arts Tradition course on Dorothy Sayers, if I'm recalling correctly. I think everyone knows Dr. Christopher Perrin in our audience for the most part, the CEO, one of the co-founders of Classical Academic Press, the parent company of ClassicalU, and author of a very popular introduction to classical education text that we sell that was also free back in the day originally when we gave everything away, evidently.
Yes.
And then Carrie, for our audience, you are a consultant. You're doing some work with the Circe Institute. You've founded a school. People can learn more about you at ClassicalEben.com. What else would you like to share with folks, just orienting and introducing yourself a little bit?
Well, I've been involved in classical education for over 25 years, and I found classical education kind of by accident. I was asked to apply for a job at a classical school when I was teaching at a Christian school in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I was thinking, well, what is this classical thing? I don't know what this is, but sure, I'll check it out. And so I had an interview and was hired, and just started learning more about classical education. At about the same time, I was pregnant with my firstborn, my son, and I was also in a master's degree program as well. And so I did some of my degree research on classical education. No one had any idea what it was. None of my professors even knew. And I just remember thinking, with my research and my time at the classical school, I just thought, I want this education for my children. And I wanted this education actually for myself. So I ended up, my children ended up going to classical schools, and I ended up teaching at some classical schools at a couple of different ones in Tulsa and then in Texas. And then I ended up homeschooling with Classical Conversations for 12 years. And so I also bring in a little bit to the book, a different perspective just as a homeschool parent and as a classical homeschool parent. So, and really, I feel like that's where a lot of my education that was kind of my introduction really to classical education, is when I was a homeschool parent. So I've done that. And then I have a consulting business, and I started a school. That's probably been the biggest, best, and hardest thing that I've ever done. And I steward that on as a board member right now.
Wonderful. Thank you for that introduction. Chris and I first met as he was founding head of school, or the school that had just launched, hired before the doors open. And I think you've described that kind of leading a new school as riding a tiger, or something like that. So some common experiences between the two of you, as well as some areas where you each you bring a different perspective and background. Well, thank you. You've titled the book Good Teacher, and I think a lot of educators kind of in the mainstream might think a proficient teacher, a competent teacher, a professional teacher. Why do we care about teachers being good? That's sort of a personal question, or it feels like, why did you choose the title Good Teacher?
When we first started working together, the title was not fixed, and we had some conversation about it. I thought we probably would keep the word principles in there somewhere, and we did. But the Good Teacher kind of evolved as the right way of encompassing two main things that we wanted to do with the book. And that was, first, to emphasize how important it is that a teacher is a model for what a student should become. As Christ says in Luke 6, when a student's been fully trained, he'll be like his teacher. And that means the teacher has to model being a good student. The teacher is just a more mature student, still filled with zeal to know and understand and acquire skill. So a teacher is just a more mature student, and therefore a good teacher is someone who models what a good student is. A good teacher is a good person. A good teacher, therefore, is a virtuous person who has moral and intellectual and civic excellence. And in the Christian tradition, it has holiness, growing holiness. If a teacher isn't good in this sense, it doesn't matter if the teacher is good or not in the second sense. And that second sense is being a good pedagogue. So we want a teacher to be good in terms of being morally virtuous, academically, intellectually virtuous, but we want then the teacher rather, to be a good pedagogue, skilled at the art and craft of teaching. So we settled on the good teacher, knowing that it would have kind of a dual meaning.
So, Carrie, this title, Good, focusing on a good teacher, reminds me of something you said when you're introducing yourself, that you wanted this education for yourself. I'm hearing Chris say there's two meanings behind good. One is actually a good person, and the other is good at the art, the skill of teaching. What would you add to that?
Yes. Well, when we were first trying to decide on a title, and also just how many chapters we were going to have and what kind of chapters. So people who read the book will notice that it will be a little bit just reorganized a little bit. So virtue used to be one of the principles, and now it is kind of been given a higher status, as it is the guiding principle that's throughout all the principles. And so Chris makes it very clear at the beginning of the book, and therefore the title Good. So
Mm-hmm.
at first I thought, oh, good, man, Andrew Boudoir is going to come after me for using this banned word, good. But there's really no other word for I think this title. I think it's the good teacher. It's about it's about living the good life. It's about
Mm-hmm.
living a virtuous life, and it's about being a virtuous teacher. And ultimately, that's the end and purpose of education. And all of these principles are directed towards that goal, is to live in goodness and to live in virtue, and to show us how to be that as a teacher.
Often, I think the phrase comes up when we talk about teachers that we've had. You might remember being in high school or college and people asking you for recommendations or what you think about a particular teacher. And often we'd say, oh, he's a really good teacher.
Mhm.
Oh, she's a good professor. Sometimes we'll say great, but we thought, great is a little too aspirational. Why don't we
Mhm.
start with being good?
Mhm.
And then maybe someday someone will call us great, but I think we should aspire to be good. And it has, as Carrie points out, it has this word has a history of Plato uses it when he talks about the good life. Jesus is the good teacher, and goodness can be understood as something we really should aspire to, but greatness might be a little too ambitious. So let's just be good first. And we kind of joked about how in Steve Martin in his master class on comedy, he says something to the effect of, if you want to be a comedian, be good. Work at the skills of actually being good. Don't assume that you are. So there's these different connotations kind of lurk in the word good teacher.
Well, I like the word good also, because, well, I'm a new master teacher apprentice, this head mentor this year for the teacher apprenticeship for CIRCE. And so when the graduates graduate, they're a master teacher. So I have a certificate on my wall that says master teacher, which actually feels kind of ominous. Like, how am I a master teacher? And so I do like the word good, because, as Christopher says, it's attainable, and it is it's something that we can all aspire to, that we all need. We all need to be good, and we all can be good. Maybe uh, I it's hard to say that one is a master teacher, but I think we can all be good.
We should all claim the goodness. It's kind of like in Christian terms, the sainthood of all believers. Something we should all claim, although we might not. It would be rather foolish to say that everyone should recognize us as certainly having attained, the kingdom of God in our earthly lives. Yeah, beautiful. So you also are a little countercultural or counterintuitive with the choice of the word principles. You might think that good teachers needed great techniques, or good teachers, need a great bag of tricks. But you're saying good teachers need principles. It is counterintuitive again. What? And this goes all the way back, as we've said. There's a video and then a ClassicalU course with 8 principles, and you've reorganized and pulled virtue into the golden thread running through all of them. But still sticking to the word principles. Where's that coming from?
Yeah, thank you for that, Jesse. That is important, because there are teaching techniques that are also important and good, and there are books that have come out that have lists of various teaching techniques that teachers can employ. But in the beginning of the book, we talk about techniques as kind of distinct from principles. So we use the illustration of carpentry. A carpenter needs to acquire various techniques: how to operate a handsaw or a power drill, or how to swing a hammer and strike a nail, and so forth. Those are techniques that do need to be mastered, and teachers need to master various techniques too. But a principle is that which guides the selection and use of various techniques. So a carpenter who is principled will not only know how to swing a hammer, he will know when he should use a hammer rather than a screw and a drill. And he will know not just when to swing a hammer, but which hammer to choose. Should it be a ball peen hammer? Should it be a drywall hammer? Should it be a framing hammer? A 12 ounce, a 16 ounce, a 20 ounce hammer? And I know that Jesse has done some work in carpentry.
Mm-hmm.
If you could see him now, he's nodding his head. And then there's some very obvious universal principles that apply to carpentry and to all of life, like measure twice, cut once. This is good not just if you're a carpenter. It's good when you're making anything that has to be carefully calculated. Another universal principle is don't begin with the roof. That's just obvious. It doesn't even need to be stated. But it's because there's something about the cosmos, about human nature. You don't begin building a roof with a roof. You start with a foundation, you build up, because of this thing called gravity that affects us all. So a principle is a universal reality. Is a principle. A principle describes something that is universal to human experience and reality.
Mm-hmm.
That applies. It's a first thing. Following the etymology, principis, principales. It means the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
I want to begin with the things that govern everything else. So it's something that will govern all that follows.
Yep.
So we asked ourselves, what are some of the universal principles that apply to all of reality, but are particularly important to know when it comes to the craft of teaching or pedagogy? And you mentioned that there were 8, and now there are 10. There could be more. This list did not fall from heaven. And someone might come up with a better way of organizing principles than we did. Carrie and I had a lot of discussion about what the sequence of them should be,
Mm-hmm.
whether or not we should list the ones that are in Latin or not. So it's not a final list by any stretch, but we think is a good list.
Yep.
And that will help teachers to know what tools to pull out of their toolbox and when. And it's only when a teacher knows when and how to use a particular teaching technique that they're really liberated or free.
Yep.
Otherwise, they need to be scripted and told what to do. Kind of like a new carpenter who's an apprentice carpenter. Hey, no, don't use the drill here. Use a hammer. Use a hammer and a nail, and use the 1-inch nail. Well, why, Mr. Master Carpenter? Well, you learn on the job until you understand what tools to use, and so teachers need to be coached in that same way.
Yeah. So I imagine you've added 3 given that you removed one and expanded from 8 to 10. Carrie, what's different about the list and the curation of it here, than in the early video that you were watching for free on YouTube, and that has been on ClassicalU now for some seven years?
Well, it's interesting because I was thinking, who am I to change these 8 principles? But I've had a great time talking with uh, Christopher about reorganizing and adding, and that has been quite a privilege to be able to have input into that. But I, you know, aside from pulling virtue out and making that the guiding principle over all the other principles and the purpose, the center of our education, we will think we added friendship and conversation, and then now I'm trying to think, what did we add? Embodied learning became actually 2 chapters.
Mm-hmm. Liturgical and poetic.
Yes, it became 2 chapters. I think everything else was the same. I can't think of what else was put in, Chris.
Yeah, I think the Optimus Magister Liber Bonus Est might not have been a part, which means the best teacher is a good book. That principle I don't think it was in the original video of the 8. Yeah.
Okay.
And then we did add conversation and friendship.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Friendship and conversation is the only one I can remember. I remember what we did changing from how we rearranged the 10 that are in ClassicalU, but I honestly can't remember what was in the original 8.
And it illustrates the point that this list isn't of supreme importance. Mm-hmm. And someone may make a good case to us someday that, you should have added this particular principle too, or use this vocabulary or this sequence, and we might be convinced, and maybe there'll be another addition. But for example, the discussion about virtue, yes, it used to just be one of the 8 essential virtues that we educate to help students to become more humanly excellent in a variety of ways. But the more we thought about it and reading the tradition, it really is kind of the beginning and the end. It's the alpha and omega of education when you read the tradition. Mm-hmm. Or it's the center, as Carrie put it. So we have an icon wheel that has all 10 icons for all of these 10 principles. And really the center of the wheel is virtue. Mm-hmm. That all of them are helping students to become humanly excellent, to do what only humans can do with studying word and number and the great books and the great ideas. And then there was another principle that we thought about listing in the 10 that we decided to not list it, mm-hmm. and that's assessment. Mm-hmm. So the last chapter is actually an appendix on assessment, and we view that as almost like the outer layer of that icon ring, that we're always assessing how we're doing in all of these various areas. Mm-hmm. So someone could make an argument that you should just put virtue on this list and you should put assessment on this list, and they could be right.
But you've treated them more as threads, that touch everything, all of the principles that are being exercised.
And I think so too. I think people could argue, well, one of the principles might not be a principle, but I think we, make a case for how these things should be important in a classical education. And again, because it's a principle, and because it really gives us freedom to use them in whatever way we see fit, in the moment of our teaching, it gives us a jumping off point. And that's really what good teachers need. Maybe just kind of a very loose structure. I think my best teaching comes when I'm given a loose structure, but I'm able to have a lot of freedom, within some ideas and things like principles. They're kind of boundaries.
In each case, we also, like, I don't, as I said at the beginning, I don't think techniques are bad, but techniques need to be used wisely, prudently by people who are principled. so they know what to do and when. So, like, for example, this is a book, Teach Like the Champion. I think it's up to 60 teaching techniques. And I've read that book and really appreciated it. And the author, Doug Lemov, tried to name each of these techniques. Well, these techniques are good, but how they're used and applied needs to be principled. So we do at the end of each chapter list a number of ways these principles can be embodied in a class. And we do this with lower school, middle school, and high school. Give a lot of basically techniques or types or incarnations of these principles in action to kind of help teachers to see how they could end up generating their own techniques if they're thinking in a principled way about pedagogy. And we're both of the conviction that if you're really principled as a pedagogue, you will be able to invent teaching techniques, various strategies, various ways of teaching on the fly, even in time. But we think it's important to start at the beginning with first things.
Yeah. I mean, the like piano playing, analogy is often used when you're talking about principles where if you know how all the different relationships, the rules that they follow to make, beautiful sounds, you can improvise music or compose music. Yeah. So you know where you're headed. You have a goal and a destination. You know what the fundamental realities of a student's experience and a teacher's experience and how those two things relate. Carrie, were you on the side of more Latin or less Latin in the names?
I think I might have been the one that said less Latin. Can you imagine that?
Yeah,
Actually,
so
I have
half of them ended up with Latin names.
Yes, I didn't win. It's fine. Hey, that's great. I have no problem with Latin. I think one of the things, we just wanted to make sure and do is to make this a very accessible book to everyone, and which is why we have, we start off with the principle. We start off talking about, what is it? What does it look like? We also talk about how do you find this in kind of the world? And then how do you find this in the classroom? And then, as Chris mentioned, we do give ideas for kind of techniques. What could this look like in a class? And I just want to stress too, again, and Chris already mentioned this. This is not these techniques or the principles are not the end all be all. The way that they're fleshed out in the classroom is not the only way. There are so many other ways. There's probably so many better ways because we're just two people trying to create different types from our imaginations and from our lived experience in the classroom. We're only two people, and so I think the beautiful thing is that, what I hope it does, it just sparks an imagination for using the principles in a different way. So, yeah, I hope people don't get caught up in the Latin or scared of the Latin, but I think we do a good job at explaining what they mean and how they're used or what they look like in the world and in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing you say, Carrie, that you wanted to make sure everything could be identified as a part of our experiences in classrooms as teachers and sort of rooted in, human experience, which principles should be that way. But then we also root things in the history of ideas, in tradition, and what's been kind of talked about over time. So that might lead us back to Latin. Chris, you were on the Latin side and you won. Why are half of them with Latin names?
You touched on one of the good reasons why we discovered this in the tradition. And so keeping the Latin names reminds us that we are looking to the wisdom of the past, to universal principles that don't change over time. And so festina lente, for example, is our first one that we list, and it means make haste slowly. Festina means hurry up or make haste, and lente means slowly. So this just means we need to master each step. And so we quickly translate these in the book, so using festina lente, make haste slowly. Multum non multum means much, not many. And repetitio mater memoriae means repetition is the mother of memory. So they're not that hard. You can almost see the English right there in the Latin if you haven't had any Latin. But just to take Vesti Nolente for an example, this particular maxim was not just a maxim for education. It was a maxim for the Roman army. The reason the Roman army was so effective was that it would slowly and thoroughly and meticulously prepare for battle, so that when it did have to fight, it would fight and fight well and win quickly and decisively. And so they're all the more effective because of their preparation. In fact, the name for the Roman army was exercitum, which means exercise. They were the group of men always in training, always preparing. And, they're known for having, the Roman army could surprise their enemy by marching 30 miles in a day and appearing, before the enemy at dawn when they didn't expect them, etc. So it applies to military matters, but it applies to virtually anything in human endeavor. Don't rush ahead until you have laid a good foundation. That would be carpentry again. Master each step would be another way of summarizing this maxim. We use the Latin because it does just remind us that we are rooted in universal traditional wisdom.
What sets this book apart? You've already touched on this in multiple ways, but there are a lot of books out there about teaching techniques, and they're helpful, and we're not against them, as Chris has said. But what else would you add to why did this book need to be written? What is distinctive about it, above and beyond several that we could already pull out of the conversation? Is there anything else that you would want to highlight, either of you?
The fact that it's principial would be, we've mentioned, and the fact that it's rooted in universal human nature and the world that we live in, and that it's a part of a tradition.
Mm-hmm. And the kind of rootedness feels like it's undergirded by the fact that it's got co-authors, and you're bringing different experiences to the table, all in a classical education tradition, but that probably reinforces that.
We wanted to deeply engage the tradition, and yet, as Carrie said, be accessible and helpful. Mm-hmm. Dare I say, practical. That would help you. It would help you as a teacher. So we have discussion questions that follow each chapter. We're thinking of groups of teachers who would maybe discuss these principles and go back into the classroom, try to teach and being informed by one of these principles, reporting back, having conversation. I think another thing, though, that sets it apart is that it's showing you the tradition with lots of quote. We begin each chapter with 3 quotations from a pre-Christian author like Plato or Aristotle, an author in the Christian and classical tradition, people like Augustine or Basil or John Henry Newman and these kinds of great thinkers, and then scripture to show. And we had like 10 quotations, at the beginning of each chapter, and we realized
Christopher was like all the quotations at the beginning.
Because there's so many beautiful ones.
Like, great.
Like, let's just take on virtue. Like Aquinas says that virtue is the principal end of education is to lead men to virtue and the truth. And Gregory of Nazianzus says the first duty of an educator is to create in the pupil a thirst for virtue. And then there's just so many other ones. Here's Basil. The Christian ought not to neglect the cultivation of virtue. On the contrary, he should make it his principal concern. Now we couldn't use all of those. We had to choose just one of them. I think that's one thing that sets apart the book. You'll see that what we're speaking of is actually emerging from a rich tradition.
Yeah.
Carrie, what else would you say? What else do you think sets it apart?
Yeah, what are some distinctives?
I would say, I'm excited about this book because I feel like it needed to be written. Christopher had these wonderful principles already, cultivated and shared on ClassicalU. And I think there was just a need for teachers to have something in their hand that was accessible. That he already knew, and these principles were already being listened to, shared, used, teachers were already listening to that. I think there needed to be something, written down. So teachers could go back easily. I love the way, whenever going back to the Latin, pretty much whenever you can count on, if there's Latin in the book, it's from Chris, and he will explain and give the Latin root word. And it's beautiful. And I love it because you'll have that part of the tradition, in the book, where so you have kind of where this came from and some history, but you also then have the practicality of it. And so you have the everyday examples. You'll have my stories from classrooms and my homeschool, and I think that balance, I think, sets it apart from other books that I've had elementary teachers often, get a little bit shy of some of the classical books out there, even on pedagogy, because it just might be too much on, the philosophy side, where
Yeah,
they're not
history,
really
philosophy,
right, and they're not really seeing
theoretical.
right, the picture of it, and they don't feel like they're part of it, and they're not seeing their classroom in it. And so I feel like teachers will see themselves in a lot of these situations, and many different kinds of teachers. So it will be your philosophy teachers in the upper school who really get into the definitions of words and the where things came from in ancient times and philosophy, those ideas, where they came from. But also, everyone will be able to see kind of, it will relate back to their classroom, I think, and to themselves. I think that these principles, one of the best things that I have learned from these principles, I've grown as writing this book, I've grown as not just as a teacher, but as a person, because as Christopher said, these principles are universal, not just to teaching. They're part of our spiritual life. They're part of our parenting. They're part of just who we are as humans. And so I think that's another thing that sets apart this book as well too, that it can help people just be better humans.
Yeah, and that brings us back to the good. It's hard to not be holistic, not have a kind of sense of the unity of the virtues when you pull out a word like the good, and make a claim about teachers being good first and foremost. That's a big claim, and it touches more than teaching; it touches all of us. So,
Jesse,
that's
may
great.
I?
Yeah.
As Carrie was talking, I was reminded of another thing that didn't occur to me till we were speaking that I think might set it apart. And that is, because it's principial and universal, it pulls in some of the contributions that have been made by some of the people we really love and admire in the past and in the present.
Oh,
For
yes.
example, Carrie's been trained by Andrew Kern in the Circe Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And that what his pedagogical training in various ways just fits hand in glove with what we're doing. Sometimes using a different portal to get into it, a different portal approach, like his description of the incarnation of a logos. He has the same concern for restful learning that we do. So we're able to see the connections when we start with a principle to any good pedagogy, including Charlotte Mason. So we have, we're able to pull in strands from Charlotte Mason and show how she represents these principles. Andrew Kern represents these principles. And then, of course, some of the great writers from the past, like, Lewis, Tolkien, Chesterton, Sayers, etc. We end up pulling in all of them in various ways to show how they, too, are embodiments of these principles. And so there's something kind of unifying, I think, about the principle approach.
Yeah, I'll just tag on that too. I think that's a really good point. It brings a lot of things in the classical world that, certain camps that we all have, that we listen to, and great teachers and pedagogues of our times brings a lot of those things in, as well as the past. But I just wanted to know, I wrote an article recently on how the Circe Master Teacher Apprenticeship, how all of the how all the 10 principles are actually cultivated within that apprenticeship, every single one of them. And it was not hard to think of how that happened. And I think that's what makes it so great, is because it's principial. It does what Christopher said. It unifies it. And so um, it translates really to all good things. It just translates to all good teaching and all good forms of good pedagogy.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's it's beautiful to see the power of that in people that are alive and working together today, as well as through the past. The way that principles make connections, tie things together, and show us the kind of wholeness of God's goodness.
For example, just interject one more time.
Yeah, go ahead.
When we were working on embodied learning, we were working through things that we had learned from our reading. And I learned a lot reading through Joseph Pieper, Jean Leclerc, and his study of monastic education, and came to see how important a liturgical embodiment of practices and routines form a student through the body.
Yeah.
And so that we call that liturgical learning is one way of describing it. You could call it other formative practices and so on. But then James Taylor had wrote this book called Poetic Knowledge, where he describes the more direct personal encounter with reality that's transformative. And we realized that that's embodied as well, and we needed to separate them. So, well, that's just another great pedagogue, James Taylor.
Yeah. So you end up with two chapters on principle number 7, embodied learning.
It may seem a little awkward that we split them up, but I think we just go deeper into each. They're completely connected, but it's just they kind of have different aspects of embodied learning. So I appreciated how we did that. James Taylor is like my hero. It's one of my poetic knowledge is one of my most favorite things to think about and talk about. It's also really hard to kind of put your finger on it sometimes. So.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting that you ended up with those two categories under embodied learning, because embodied, communicates tangible, physical, and poetic doesn't intuitively communicate that, but yet everybody, you read all the great authors on these, they're inextricably tied together. That the sort of mystical power of language is tied to physical embodied experience in just profound ways. So really, really cool point. I wanted to, go over the principles, but I think that's too ambitious, as we're nearing the end of a reasonable audience listening time. And what I try to, so I'm going to cue you up each with a question. Who are some good teachers you knew in your own lifetimes that embodied some of these principles? Are there any stories from your own life that might illustrate whether they made it into the book or not? But Carrie, would you start us out?
Sure. I'm glad you asked this question, because I love to reminisce about my teachers. I'm one of those people. I don't know if everyone is like me in this way or not, but I've noticed that I'm the kind of person who seeks out mentorship and seeks out good teachers in my life. And I think I've always been attracted to that. Maybe it's why I ended up becoming a teacher. I don't know. But if you read the book, you'll find, well, first of all, I dedicate it to my mother. And I surprised her with that. I showed her a digital copy, and she was kind of in awe that I would do that, because she was my first she was my first teacher, good teacher. And so shout out to the homeschool moms out there. You're your child's first good teacher. The other two that I mention in the acknowledgments, and I think I mentioned one of these two in the body of the work, is Mrs. Grinzel. So shout out to Mrs. Grinzel, my 5th and 6th grade teacher. I just recently talked to her, and she is still on this earth, and I believe she's in her 90s now, and she is still going strong. But she was one of my most favorite teachers. Had her 2 years in a row. Had a combined fifth and sixth grade class at a small private school in Long Beach, or Lakewood, California. And she just was one of those teachers that had high expectations and was kind of a model in her own life. She was somebody to imitate. And, she guided us spiritually. And I knew that she had some personal things going on in her life during the times that I had her, and some major struggles, and would share with us some. But just watching her go through that with such steadfastness, and to be at work every single day, was just incredible. And the lessons that we had were, amazing. We did the biggest thing that I remember in her class is that we had an economic mini society where we literally embodied an economic system in our class, and we created our own currency, our own government, our own flag, our own way of making decisions as a body of people, a community. I had my own business, and if you can imagine, if people know me, it was Smith and Barton Theatrical Performances. And so I had a theater playhouse. My maiden name is Smith, so I was Smith. Of course, it was first Smith and Barton, but I put on plays, and I hired people to be in my theater, and I charged money for people to come. I did the costumes, and then she suggested that she would give me a great idea if she got 10% of my profits. So I trusted her, and she says, "I think you should sell popcorn." I was like, "That's a great idea." So I diligently gave her 10% of my profits. And, I went to get a huge thing of popcorn, and I sold it and made a killing. So it was just so fun. We just played. I'm smiling, if you can, you all can't.
You can hear it. You can hear it.
But I'm smiling. And my other teacher, just real quick, she's my college teacher. I was an education major at first. I'm now almost finished with my doctorate in humanities. But I started out as an education major, and Dr. Van Thiel, she just was one of I basically chose her, decided not to actually go into history and political science because I wanted to be her student. So I followed a person. I made a decision.
You picked your major, your field of study based on the teacher you wanted to follow.
I absolutely did. And she is actually still with us too. And she actually lives around the corner from me now. And she is a supporter of the school I co-founded, and is still a mentor to me. So.
Well, thank you. So some deep threads there of lifelong relationships. It almost sounds like your fifth and sixth grade teacher formed a polis, like a whole city.
We did
out of her little.
Absolutely, she was a lot of our from our year. We all loved her, so she was.
That's astonishing. So Christopher, any teachers that come to mind in your own life?
Yeah, there are many. But probably not enough. Probably should have been more, I guess. That's one reason we're trying to recover good education. There were a few who stand out. One is a professor I had in first year in the University of South Carolina, History 101, Professor John Dolan. And he sparked fascination in history. His lectures in his class were kind of like educational theater. He would throw chalk, stomp around. He would write words on the board we didn't know and chastise us because we didn't know them. Greek words like the word polis. And I remember him putting that word on the board, or a word like it, and saying, "You don't know any Greek, do you? You don't even know Spanish, even though you took it for 4 years. You still can't order a taco." And I remember thinking at that moment, well, I'm just going to go learn Greek then. I'll show him.
I'll show him.
So he was one who piqued wonder, and in his chastising way, he was an Irish American, 6'4", 250 pounds, silver hair down to his shoulders. And then some others come to mind, and I'll just mention briefly that are living. I get to travel and speak with other classical educators, and I've gotten to know Andrew Kern and Martin Cawthron and Andrew Pudawa a lot, seen them present, been on panels with them for over 10 years, and all three of them I've learned from. Just watching them teach and respond to questions and going to their own lectures. I'm just so grateful to be around people like them. And I've seen Jesse teach in the past as well, and now I co-presented with Carrie. There are people who have acquired skill and who model virtue, who inspire me today. Jesse and I are part of a fellowship called the Alcuin Fellowship, where we see people like Robbie Jane and Kevin Clark and Grant Horner and others, present their own papers and teach. David Diener, many of them, Brian Williams, and they're. Now I want to name them all.
But that's not fair, because now you made me think of other teachers I needed to name.
I've opened Pandora's box.
Joe Parham, they're great living teachers. And of course we've tried to gather them, as you know, Jesse, at ClassicalU, because we've met them. We want them to we want others to know them and see them. So those people continue to inspire me.
Yeah, and your answer, Chris, particularly makes me think how the classroom, you've sort of exploded the classroom, so that life is an ongoing classroom, as you've learned professionally, serving and working in the classical renewal. Well, thanks to each of you. This was absolutely delightful. I feel like we, barely touched, the content of the book came up in multiple places beautifully, but I think we have not had spoilers. I hope we've teased folks. Yes, any last words from either one of you?
You're right that it's probably not wise to go through all 10 principles, because that we would just go wide. But I'm gonna try to do it in 90 seconds for your list.
Just give a list.
Okay, so
yes, absolutely.
The first three are Latin, and I'll give you the translations immediately if you don't recognize them. Facile lente, make haste slowly or master each step. Multum non multa, much, not many. It's better to study muchly, or a few things, deeply and well, than to superficially cover a lot of things that students will forget. Repetitio mater memoriae means to seek again or to repeat. Repetition is the mother of memory. Regular review that's vital and fresh, and that keeps circling the things that are most important until they're permanently possessed. Songs, jingles, and chants means that especially with students from up to age 12, what they sing they love, and what they sing they will remember. So it becomes a version of repetitio. And that's another thing that you'll see in the book, is that all of these principles overlap in various ways with each other. Wonder and curiosity, creating wonder such that we are just then ignited with a kind of zeal to know more. And that comes only when we can gaze and have appropriate time with things to wonder at them. And that leads right into Scholae and contemplation. Scholae is an atmosphere and a disposition, a set-apart time in which students can engage in wonder and curiosity. And it also involves embodiment, because a Scholae is an atmosphere. It's a place, as well as a mood that we create that leads students to ongoing study. And then embodied education, we've talked about already. Liturgical learning is what we do corporately together in a particular setting that disposes us to learn and that teaches us. Formative practices, you might say. And poetic learning is personal engagement with some aspect of the cosmos that engages us directly and so powerfully that it makes something happen within us, and therefore it's poetic, because poetic means something made. Poetry is made within you. Not just verbal poetry, but all kinds of made reality happens when we engage personally with the cosmos. And then Docendo discimus means by teaching we learn, and this simply means that students need to have opportunities to teach back what they're learning, because when you teach, you learn twice. All of us who are teachers know this. When you teach, you come to know much better. So why don't we have the older students teaching the younger, etc.? And then Optimus Magister Liber Bonus est means the best teacher is a good book, or at least often it is. We want the very best books put before students for deep engagement and study. We need to select those books very carefully and in sequence, with probably combined prudence and wisdom from talking to others. And then lastly, conversation and friendship is what we're always engaged in, which is a sympathetic, engaged fellowship with our students who really are just immature teachers, and we just being more mature students. And so it's building a friendship and a fellowship together that is one of mutual communal learning and enthusiasm.
That was pretty good.
I know it was 90 seconds, but it was about as fast as I could.
No, that was very helpful. I'm sure listeners are going to appreciate that. Carrie, what is a principle out of the list that comes most naturally to you that you just love to do and do when you're teaching yourself personally? And then what is one that you have to be most intentional about and kind of
That's a great question.
recall to yourself, to sort of make sure it's in view?
That's a great question. I would say make haste slowly is the one that I need to work on most. And I have purposefully tried to practice that. I'm a go person. I want to continue and finish and check it off the box. Honestly, diving into this book and my time in the Circe apprenticeship, and I'm looking forward to being a head mentor because it's going to force me again to be in a space of rest and to teach from rest, because that's not something that comes naturally to me, but when I do it, it's beautiful and I love it and I need it. And I think we all need it. The one I think I do well at is embodied learning. I think I naturally, I like to anytime I'm teaching anything, I am coming up with something sensory to go with it. And I want my students to live it out. I want them to sing it. Oh, well, I guess I would say then songs, chants, and jingles. See, they all kind of overlap.
They do. Yeah, they echo and overlap.
Yeah. I like to do songs, chants, and jingles. I'm a musician. I like to sing. I like to come up with crazy little poems and songs for things. And so that's my worst, and those are my better ones.
Good. The most natural and the challenges.
Yep.
Beautiful. Thanks so much to both of you. It's been a delight, and to dive into your book a little bit and share it with folks. Are there any distinctions with the course in the book that you would want to note? I know they're very much overlapping material. Is there anything that sets the ClassicalU course apart from the book, or vice versa?
No, your question reminds me too that we will have a complimentary website.
Yeah.
Published called I think it's going to be called goodteacherbook.com, something like that. But we're going to have additional types or embodiments of all of these principles listed. We're hoping to actually gather them from others. Actually, there's going to be quite a bit of material. We've created a number of appendices to kind of help the teachers who read this book to apply these principles. We have a glossary. We've got the taxonomy of virtues for those who might not be as familiar with the virtue tradition and the cultivation of virtue. Teaching types of various kinds, checklists, assessment checklists, and so forth. You just prompted me to say that. I forgot to mention that earlier.
Thank you for capturing that. So that'll be a resource that's open to the public, supporting the book, and giving people a lot more.
Downloadable PDFs of all of those appendices, or most of them. Downloadable 2-page description of these 10 principles. But the course represents another media in which Carrie and I present these principles. So it's designed to be a complement. You could conceivably profit from viewing the course and not getting the book, or reading the book and not getting the course. But I think the two of them together are emphasizing the repetitio mater memoriae.
And multum non multum.
Yes.
There's multa non multa, that it goes deeper. You go a little bit deeper because there's a little bit different. There's different examples, I think, in the Classical U course.
And then Carrie and I have maybe a 10 to 15 minute conversation after each presentation of each principle. Yeah. So the viewers will enjoy some interaction. And then of course on Classical U, we're able to post documents and other resources and links that I think will be helpful.
Yep. Very good. Thanks so much. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for hosting, Jesse.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Chris.
You've been listening to Classical U's podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We release podcast episodes once a month with our presenters. Please also check out our live learning events, webinars in collaboration with Skole Academy and Skole Communities. Classical U podcast show listeners, you can purchase any Classical Academic Press item outside of our digital items, any physical product on Classical Academic Press, as well as any subscription with ClassicalU.com. Just enter at the point of purchase CU Podcast, all one word, CU Podcast, to receive 10% off Classical Academic Press and ClassicalU.com items.